The Redman story started in 1901 when my grandfather and his brother arrived at the railway station and looking for work, and ended up working at what's now the Winds winery.
Learning the skills and the art of making wine, and then his family purchasing a small vineyard in Coonawarra in 1908, and that then led him to make his first wines. That slowly evolved, and he was joined by his two sons, Owen and Don, and as a family they started producing some of the early well-recognised Coonawarra wines.
At that stage there was only two wineries in Coonawarra, which was my grandfather's winery and also the Winds winery. There was not a huge amount of demand for red wine, and from about 1919 through until the late 30s, what's now Winds winery actually became a distillery. So a lot of the red wine that was being produced in Coonawarra and a lot of the white wine was being distilled into brandy. So the only person making table wines in Coonawarra was Bill Redman. In some respects, if he hadn't been making table wines, the wine future of Coonawarra might be totally different to what it is today. In 1937, my dad, Owen, started working with his father at the winery. All the wine was being sold in bulk to the larger wine companies. In 1950, a renowned restaurateur came through Coonawarra and said, "I'd like to try some of your wines." And they said, "Well, we've only got some wines in barrel, we haven't got any in bottle." And he said, "Oh, you're mad, you should bottle your own wine." So that was 1950 was the first vintage that was bottled under the Redman label. At the time, they didn't think Redman sounded glamorous enough as a wine label, so my auntie had a French dictionary, so they came up with the name Rouge Homme, which was a literal translation into French for red man. And so the Rouge Homme label was born.
With the growth of the industry during the 60s, the Redman family basically were made an offer by a larger company to sell out, and the family thought it was a very opportune thing to do. So at that time in '65, Bill Redman retired from the industry after about 70 odd years of winemaking. Owen straight away said he wanted to stay in the industry, so he bought new vineyards, built the new winery that we're in here today.
Dad, Owen and Mum Edna bought Arthur Hoffman's vineyard, there was 40 acres of land and about 16 acres of Shiraz grapes on that. So the 1966 was the first Redman vintage. First three vintages were made at Brands Lera, and then the completion of the current Redman winery was done in time for the 1969 vintage. Mal and I started work for Dad in 1981, and now I've got two sons, Dan and Mike, who've been here. Dan's been about 12 years and Mike's been about 7 years.
What we need to do is make sure that the Redman story is still being told, like, you know, my grandfather Owen and grandmother Edna did in those early days of getting on the road and seeing people and telling their story about Redman. And that's a story that we need to keep telling. We are a small family business. We've been going for 4 generations. We do make lovely, traditional, medium-bodied style reds that can be enjoyed with food, without food, and can lay down and be enjoyed with some age on them.